Governor Connally is perhaps best known for his articulate, forceful, spellbinding oratory. He has spoken and will continue to speak out candidly on the issues. His distinguished public service career is well known. A few of the highlights include a close associate of President Lyndon Johnson, Secretary of the Navy, 3 consecutive terms as governor of the state of Texas, Secretary of the Treasury, and a candidate for the Republican nomination for president. Students, faculty, land and patrons, please welcome the Honorable John B. Connally.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Cooper, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Tosh, Dr. Flinchball, would you please extend to your distinguished president my congratulations for his wisdom. I want to congratulate the Board of Regents for choosing a man smart enough to skip this meeting and be in Topeka for the meeting of the Board of Regents. He obviously knows where the best interest of this university lies. To the patrons, to the faculty, to the students, let me express my deepest gratitude for the privilege and opportunity of being here on the campus of this great Kansas State University to participate in the Alfred M. Landon Lecture Series. I only regret that I will not have the privilege, apparently today, of seeing the distinguished American for whom this series is named. I've had the privilege over many, many years of seeing him under many different circumstances, and always it's been a source of great personal pride and pleasure for me to be in his company, to be privileged to listen to his wit and his wisdom. And I want to express my regrets that I will not have that privilege today, and I want to commend Kansas State University for inaugurating the Landon Series, and in honor of a man who I think has had a remarkable career and an impact on this country. According to the desired formula, I think I'm going to try to speak no more than 20 minutes today and reserve the rest of the time that you have, which will allow us about 30 minutes, as I understand, before many of the students have to go to class, for questions from the audience on any subject that you wish. Let me start off by simply pointing out to you that in the decade of the 1980s, I think America has to face up to a decade of danger and a decade of decisions, unlike anything that it's experienced in perhaps in the life of this nation. We are finally coming face to face with the realities of the times in which we live. We've too long ignored it. We have been diverted from focusing on things that are most relevant and most important to us. And as a consequence, we have today, and we are today, witnessing an incredible series of events. Let me quickly run over them. In the foreign affairs field, we see the greatest loss of prestige and influence that I think this nation has ever witnessed or ever gone through. We've seen a deterioration on a relative basis of the armed forces strength of this nation, to the point where we have clearly lost any similarity of parity with the Soviet Union in conventional military strength, and indeed the Soviets are now seeking not parity but superiority in strategic nuclear weapons as well. And unless we change our policies and change our course, they will achieve a strategic nuclear capability over the United States in the decade of the 1980s. This brings into question then how do you deal? How do you deal with a monolithic government? How do you deal with a communist government? How do you deal with a country such as the Soviet Union unless you deal from a position of strength? Without that strength, how do we How do we live in a world basically dominated and controlled by the Soviet Union? That's a problem that we have to face up to. It's a problem we have to try to answer. It doesn't just stop with military strength, though. We have been blind to the motivation of other nations throughout the world. We have been blind to the realities of the changes that were occurring around the world in an economic sense. And we permitted the industrial base of this nation to deteriorate to the point where we are rapidly becoming non-competitive in the marketplaces of the world. We've done it under the assumption that the United States had such strength, had such superiority, had such a great lead and such a tremendous technological advantage that we could violate all the principles of economic reason and logic and without suffering any disadvantages whatsoever. Those things are now coming home to roost for us. We see today a rate of inflation in this country in excess of 18%. We see a prime rate of 19%. That's the highest interest rate that this nation has ever known. Even during the period of the Civil War, these interest rates are as high as anything we've known in all our history. This rate of inflation that we're experiencing today is something new for Americans. We don't know how to cope with it. We don't know how to live with it. It's going to have enormous repercussions and reverberations throughout this society. And what's happening today in the Fed policies is going to bring about a depression in many segments of American society. It's going to adversely impact to an amazing degree the home building industry, the automotive industry, the savings loan associations, just to name a few. And before we're through, before the end of this year, we could well be deeply embedded in not just a recession, but in a depression, and certainly many of these vital industries. We're witnessing today a loss of productivity in America that is not the result of an inability or an unwillingness on the part of American workmen to do their best to seek to compete, but rather it's a reflection of the unwise policies that we've followed over a number of years that have resulted in us retaining an outmoded and an obsolescent industrial base in this country. 3 weeks ago, perhaps some of you noticed, United States Steel and Bethlehem Steel, the two largest steel companies in the country, announced that their very survival might well depend upon federal aid because they were operating with obsolete plants. Why are they operating with obsolete plants? Basically because we in America have not faced up to the fact that other nations had policies that encouraged the revitalization and the rebuilding of their economic base every 10 years. Ours encourages rebuilding every 30 years. And as a consequence, we're trying to compete now with more modern plants, more modern techniques that have been built and adopted in other nations around the world. Speaking of the steel industry in particular, of 24 modern blast furnaces in the world today, 14 of them are in Japan. 14 out of the 24. Not a single one is in the United States. That's why U.S. Steel and Bethlehem are saying that they question their ability to compete in the marketplace of the world. Let me give you an example of how this impacts us. We're getting ready to build, indeed if we can finance, a pipeline from the Prudhoe Bay and the McKenzie Delta area just in the Arctic Circle to bring gas from that part of the world down through Canada into the United States, which we desperately need. It's going to cost somewhere between $16 and $20 billion, depending on when we build it. We're going to pay for it. But we're not going to furnish a foot of the pipe that it takes to build it. Why? Because it was designed to be a 56-inch diameter pipe. There's not a steel mill in America that can roll a foot of pipe 56 inches in diameter. The largest we can roll in any steel mill in this country is 48 inches in diameter. So we'll buy all the steel for this pipeline from Western Europe and from Japan. Now this is happening time and time and time again. And yet the incentives in this country are to penalize savings, to penalize productivity, to penalize the rebuilding of the economic base of the country. The United States today, the productivity in the non-farm sector of this country has been on a steady decline over the last 20 years. It's now, in the non-farm sector, less than the level. It's in the zero, minus zero category in terms of productivity. In Japan, productivity is increasing and the rate of inflation is low. In Germany, the rate of productivity is increasing and the inflation is low. In this country, our rate of productivity has been declining for 20 years and inflation is building and building and building. Now, part of that is the fact that we've not understood the need in America to save and to invest and to rebuild. Consequently, we have the lowest rate of saving of any industrial nation in the world. These are facts. They're known. They've been known. The average American doesn't think about them. He doesn't think in those terms. And our political leaders have not been telling the American people what we had to do and why we had to do it. Today, the most recent figures on the rate of savings in America, we're saving 3% of our disposable income. That's all. That's the lowest of any industrial nation. By contrast, Germany is saving 13% of their disposable income. Japan saves 25% of her disposable income. That's why they have the money. They have the capital to rebuild every 10 years. We've not understood the necessity for it. Consequently, we tax capital gains in America. We're only one of two industrial nations in the world that does it, and Great Britain followed our suit. We're the first ones that started it. Great Britain followed about 4 years ago. No other industrial nation in the world taxes capital. We also tax savings, as you know. If you put money in the savings and loan to earn interest or in a bank certificate of deposit, you pay a tax on the income from those savings. So that discourages savings in America. There's no policy that encourages savings, no policy that encourages depreciation. What we basically need to do is change the whole thrust of our policies, of our government policies. We need to encourage savings. And up to a limited extent, say $10,000, we ought to permit any American to put as much as $10,000 into a savings account, into a certificate of deposit in a bank, invest it in the common stock, invest it in bonds, and if they'll leave all of that money in that account, let's provide an incentive to save. If they'll leave the money in that account, all the principal and all of the income, there'll be no tax on it whatever. We need to change the whole depreciation schedule in America. Why would anybody invest $4 billion to build a new steel mill if they can't recover it except over a 25 or 30-year period? They're not going to do it because things are changing too rapidly in this world. They don't have the confidence. They don't know what's going to happen 30 years from now. Right today, many of the insurance companies in America will loan money on a 30-year amortization, but they have a recapture clause after 5 years. They can renegotiate the entire trade. That's the only way they're willing to loan money now. They're not going to loan money for 30 years on a home mortgage or anything else because they don't know where we're going. They don't know what's going to happen. They've lost confidence in this nation. So in the decade of the 1980s, we have to understand that we must deal with the realities of the times in which we live. And we have to understand that we're dealing with forces over which we no longer have complete control. We assumed in the aftermath of World War II that because we were the most powerful nation on earth, and we were, militarily and economically, we somehow assumed that that power and that influence was forever going to be with us, that we had nothing to worry about, that the United States was the supreme power in the world, and that we could maintain the technological advantage that we had without attempting to try, that we could adopt and live with unwise policies without damaging the economy of this country or without impacting the viability of our economic system. And we've done that. Yet, at the very same time, we shared the bounty, we shared the strength of this land with other nations around the world. We helped rebuild other nations, but they understood better than we the competitiveness of the world in which we're living. They understood better than we that out of the colonial empires that expired at the end of World War II and well over 100 new independent nations arose, they understood better than we the sense of independence that was going to prevail in those nations. They were understood better than we that the resources which we were consuming at an unbelievable rate were no longer going to be available to us at our price. We represent about 5% of the people on earth, yet we consume approximately 1/3 of all of the resources of the world. We are the most productive nation on earth, beyond any question. But we haven't learned to deal with that. We haven't learned to use the economic power we have. We haven't learned that we have to develop an energy policy. We haven't learned that we're vulnerable economically, that we're vulnerable militarily. And we haven't understood what that means to us. We've assumed that because we were a freedom-loving people, that everyone in the world, that these new nations were going to emerge, that they're all going to seek the same type of government, that we can insist they have a democracy such as we had and such as we have, that they're all going to seek the same things that we seek. But they come from different backgrounds, they come from different experiences, they come from different educational levels, and what might work for us has not necessarily worked for them. So we've been unrealistic in assuming that the world is going to emulate what we've been able to do in this country. And we have tried to impose our standards of government, our standards of morality, our way of doing business on other countries throughout the world, and it's not succeeded. Largely it's failed because we did not understand nor appreciate the necessity for dealing with the diversity with which we were confronted around the world. As a consequence, today, we're extremely vulnerable. Let me tell you how vulnerable we are. We've assumed that somehow Americans have great faith. We're an optimistic nation. We're people who believe in the future. We're people who have great confidence in ourselves to the point where it becomes at times dangerous. And we're at that point today. A few years ago we had a civil defense program. Today we have none. Just none. And yet today we're more vulnerable. We're the most vulnerable people on the face of the earth today, and we don't understand it. We came from being the most protected, the most sheltered, the most invulnerable people on earth, in 25 years to the most vulnerable people. Until well after World War II, we had two great allies in America: time and distance. We had time to prepare, time to arm, time to marshal the strengths of the country. We did it in World War I, we did it in World War II. We've done it always in our history. But we had time to react, because we were invulnerable because of the depth and the breadth of the oceans that surrounded us. So we had time and distance. But suddenly we changed the world. We changed it when we split the atom. And we changed it for all times and for all people. And in that one thing, we sowed the seeds of our own vulnerability. Because today we're the most vulnerable. When we built the atom bomb, and when we showed other nations how to do it, and they learned along with us, our two great allies disappeared. We no longer have time. We no longer have distance. The ICBMs of the Soviet Union are pointed and aimed directly at the United States. They're not aimed at Mexico, Central America, South America. They're aimed at the United States. We're the most vulnerable people on earth, and we're 30 minutes away. We neither have time nor distance. And yet we've somehow assumed that we were going to be able to live with this kind of an environment from a position of weakness, and that we were going to deal with it from a position of weakness. No way. No way that we should realistically assume that we can deal with a monolithic, godless ideology such as that prevails in the Soviet Union from a position of weakness. We can't do it. If indeed we assume that we can, and indeed if we persist in trying, we're going to be without options. And that's what we're approaching now. Without options. What option did we have in Iran? Did we have any greater options in Belgium or Holland or Luxembourg? Suppose it happened to them. What options did we have in Afghanistan? Anybody afraid of what we were going to do? Not at all. Why? Because we really have no options. Who has the options? The Soviets say they have now. The Soviets say in Pravda nearly every day that the United States can no longer call the tune, the United States can no longer even react to the objectives of the Soviet Union. This is where we are. In the time frame of 1982 and 1983, the Soviets are going to achieve a capability. I don't think it's going to happen, but they're going to achieve a capability of a first strike attack against the United States that will knock out over 95% of all of our land-based ICBMs. Yet we haven't built the MX missile, the mobile missile. We've been content with a fixed ICBMs. Yet we know they're going to be vulnerable. And there's not anything we can do about it now. Time has already passed. If we started tomorrow, we couldn't do anything about it in the time frame of 1982 and 1983. What option will an American president have? If the Soviets decide to launch a first strike against the United States, they'll knock out 95% of our land-based ICBMs. Then a president is confronted with a choice. Does he launch the aging B-52 bombers, hoping they can get through the 12,000 surface-to-air missiles ringing the Soviet cities and Soviet installations? Does he launch the missiles from the submarines? If so, remember, they're not targeted on ICBMs, on fixed ICBMs in the Soviet Union. They're targeted on cities and people, because of the imprecise manner in which they're going to have to be delivered, relatively imprecise. And it's estimated that though if they launch a first strike against the United States, they'll obviously evacuate their cities. They have bomb shelters in all the major cities to care for millions of people. It's estimated we'll kill 15 million Soviets. But we will not destroy their capacity to launch a second strike against the United States, which would be targeted against American cities and American people. And because we have no bomb shelters, we have no defense, it's estimated that on their second strike, they would kill 150 million Americans. What kind of option is that? Now, obviously we don't want that. Obviously we don't expect that. But the point is, we're not in a position to do anything about it. We're in the hands of someone else, just as we're in the hands of someone else in terms of energy. This is the most industrialized nation in the world. We're the greatest trading nation in the world. We're the greatest producing nation in the world. We have the highest use of energy from inanimate sources of any nation in the world. Yet we sit here vulnerable. Why? Because we didn't understand, because we didn't see, because we didn't act to produce our own sources of energy, the coal, the nuclear power, the oil shales, solar energy, other resources, geothermal, all types of energy a long time ago. It's not because we didn't have notice. It's because in this form of government, we're basically unresponsive, and this is the real crux of the decisions we're going to have to make in the decade of the 1980s. Can a representative form of government respond and be responsive in a timely fashion to changing world conditions? We do. How many of you in this hall remember when they closed the Suez Canal in 1956? A great many of you remember when they closed the Suez. That changed the world. But we didn't change. But we knew then that there was no security in the importation of foreign oil. And some of us said so. But nothing happened. But that showed then that other nations could have an impact of enormous consequences on this country. All of you remember, substantially everyone in this great auditorium would remember the October War, the Yom Kippur War of 1973, and the subsequent embargo by the Arab nations of any shipment of oil to the United States. That should have proven to us conclusively, beyond any shadow of a reasonable doubt, that we were vulnerable. Yet what have we done since then? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We've imported more oil. 50% now of all that we use comes in imported from other countries around the world. Failure to receive it would mean chaos and consternation in this country. And yet it could be shut off. And overnight almost. Yet we've done nothing since 1973. That's almost 7 years. We've done nothing about developing coal, nothing about the oil shales, nothing about solar energy. We made it more difficult to mine coal. We've made it more difficult to explore for oil and gas. We've made it more difficult to build nuclear power plants in this country. And we've done substantially nothing about development of alternative sources of energy. This is an unrealistic attitude. It leaves us vulnerable. Why haven't we? Because the political leadership of the country was not prepared to say to the American people, here's what's happening to us, here's what we must do. Right today, there are a great many people in this country do not think there's an energy crisis in America. A great many people would argue about it. And there's not in the sense that you can drive up and fill up your car at a gas pump. But there is an enormous crisis in terms of the ultimate vulnerability of this nation to being held in bondage, and held as a hostage by the OPEC countries of the world. That is an immediate crisis, and it's a continuing crisis of enormous proportions, yet somehow we in America don't understand it. We don't relate to it. And these are the things that are happening to us today. This is why I'm as pessimistic as I am about what's going to happen to us unless we face realities in the 1980s. We have to rebuild the industrial base. We have to be fiscally responsible. We have to develop an energy policy. We have to increase the military capabilities of this country in order to have any options. So the decade, I end as I began, by simply saying that the decade of the 1980s is going to be a decade of danger and a decade of decision for America. We're going to have to decide what kind of a country we want, what kind of a society we want to live in. We have to decide whether or not a free society can indeed and will it ever be responsive to the changing conditions of the world, changes which we're bringing about every single day, and whether we're realistic enough to understand that we have to change the industrial base of this country every 10 years, because 10 years from now, 90% of the products we'll be using and consuming have not yet been invented nor discovered. We're living in that kind of a world, and it's a world that we've transformed. We've transformed it in communications and transportation. We're doing it in medicine. We're doing it in foods. We're doing it in everything we touch. Yet we somehow fail to look and understand the underlying stabilizing factors that have made it possible. So again, I simply say that this brings on new challenges and new opportunities for America. And for those of you who are students here, don't let me leave you on a pessimistic note, because there's not anything that we're confronted with that we can't do something about. We can do something about every one of these problems. Whether you're talking about conventional weapons, we can do something about it. We can increase our military capabilities. We don't need to lose the lead in strategic nuclear weapons, and we have to do it for a long time to come until we're certain that other nations around the world are going to be as peace-loving as we are, that are going to be sure that they're going to respond to the same motivations that prompt us. We can do something about revitalizing the industrial base of this country. We can do that, but we have to understand first the necessity for doing it. We have to have the political courage to face up to it. We have to also understand that the thing that sets us apart, the thing that's permitted us to do more for more people in more ways than any other society that ever existed on the face of the earth, is because of the economic system we have. And we have to preserve that economic system, and we have to make that economic system work. And we can't stifle it. We can't strangle it with continued outflow of rules and regulations and bureaucrats who come to tell you when to do, what to do, and how to do at every step of your life. We can do something about energy. We have it here. We have it in abundance. We just have to develop it. We have to be realistic enough to understand that there are certain choices, certain hard decisions that have to be made. We have to make them, and we have to get about our business. And if we'll do that, I assure you that the horizons of America were never broader and never brighter, because we of all people have changed this world in one generation more than any other generation that's ever existed, or more than any other nation in centuries has ever done. We're performing miracles every single day. And we're going to continue to do it because out of the laboratories you build and out of the minds of the young people at Kansas State University today are going to come new products, new ways, new inventions, new innovations that's going to change and transform this world. We're never going back. We're always moving forward. And if we'll rebuild respect for our system, regain confidence in ourselves and in our system, there's no limit to what we can do. We can indeed prosper, and we can indeed provide a security for the free world. We can indeed secure peace in this world if indeed we understand that you secure peace through strength and that you maintain the economic base on which that strength is built. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me now take your questions, and I'll try to be as brief as I can so we can cover as many as possible. Just stand where you are and speak. Oh, the microphones are on the aisles. If you can make your way to them. If you can't, just stand where you are. I'll repeat the question so everyone can hear it.
I'm a high school student up here in Manhattan High School. My name's Al Madrid. Now, right now, the foreign policy that President Carter has is leaving the people in question. The question that I have to you is, what do you actually think of it? Is it a secure foreign policy, one which will actually protect us, and is it one which will be there, ready to fight if need be?
No, it is not a foreign policy that will protect us. It's a foreign policy that has been confusing. It has been inconsistent. It has led our friends to wonder. It has given encouragement to our potential foes. I think beyond any question, this administration and this president has operated a foreign policy of appeasement and a foreign policy of weakness. He has assumed very unrealistically that his good intentions and his goodwill was going to be returned in kind from the Soviet Union, and they have not done so. They've responded as anyone should have known they would. They've responded with aggression to signs of weakness, and they'll do it every single time because that's the type of society in which they live. It's the type of environment that thrives in that country. It's the type of motivation that communism has in the Soviet Union. And we're going to have to learn. I hope we've learned that lesson. I hope we don't have to learn it again. But because we did nothing in Angola, 18 months later they moved into Ethiopia. And because we did nothing there, 18 months later they moved into Afghanistan. And they're not through yet. And so long as we operate on the assumption that they're going to return the goodwill and good intentions on our part, they're going to move aggressively throughout the world as they've been doing. Yes.
Connally,
Yes, ma'am.
do you accept the reality that our economic system has sent destruction, has caused physical, cultural, social destruction throughout the entire world? And how does your call that we just keep on doing more what we've done in the past deal with this?
No, I don't assume that we have sent inordinate destruction throughout the world at all. I think our system has contributed more to the preservation of peace and freedom than any other system that ever existed. We've not been the aggressor. We didn't start World War I. We didn't start World War II. We were not the aggressors. We were the defenders of freedom. We have, it seems to me, brought greater advancement and social behavior and security for more people in less time than any other power that ever existed.
Okay. I'm not saying that good things haven't happened, but corporations have totally misused their enormous amounts of power for culturally just overwhelming people, for taking over entire lands for their own benefit. And
Well, where has this happened? you know, you're making broad sweeping statements, and can you define one? Where does this happen?
I didn't come to this prepared with facts. I guess I'm assuming.
Well,
wait a minute.
No, I'm
okay.
not trying to embarrass you at all. Let me.
I'm assuming a general understanding of, you know, that the audience does know about, like, for example, okay, corporate dumping, for example. Corporate dumping is when there are things that have been banned in the United States, for example, pajamas with retardants that cause cancer in children. The corporations then turn to the government and ask permission to dump these products on third world countries. And the government says, sure, go right ahead. And this is happening with drugs, with drugs that our government says you can't give to our people. And we just turn around and dump it on the third world. And you're saying, no, we don't need more regulations. And how do you deal with this?
Well, let me respond to it by simply saying, I don't know whether they dump flame retardant pajamas on the world. Maybe they do. I'm not. But let me also tell you that we produce enough wheat right here in Kansas to help feed the world. We're responsible for saving about 13 million people throughout the world because we produce the foodstuff. We produce the vaccines, and we produce the medicines that save young people, that save the babies, and we're leading the world and lowering the rate of mortality at birth. We've contributed so much to the good of mankind that I frankly am unsympathetic with a question such as yours. Very frankly, I don't think we're deprivators. I don't think we go in and raid and rape other countries. This country, we have gone overseas, and our corporations have gone overseas, and what have we done? We've transformed the world. Who found the copper mines? Who found the tin mines? Who went into the jungles and climbed the mountains and crossed the deserts to develop the oil resources of the world? We did. Our corporations did. What's evil about it? You know,
Governor Connally, if we were to begin, say tomorrow, pursuing serious policies to eliminate the military and economic vulnerabilities that you described, would you share with us your estimate of about how long it would take, and secondly, how the process of doing that might impact on the lives that we're living now?
I would think it'll take in the range of $15 billion over the next 10 years to rebuild the conventional and strategic, in addition to the present level of appropriations. I think it'll take us a minimum of 5 to 10 years in order to do it, and it'll take in the range of $150 billion over a 10-year period in excess of what we're presently appropriating for defense efforts. It'll be in that range. What weapon systems I would use, I frankly don't know. I'd want to have more expert advice than I've had as to whether or not I'd build the B-1 as opposed to the MX missile, or how I would have the mobile missile, and so forth and so on. When you get into the weapon systems, they're so incredibly complex that I don't have the judgment offhand to tell me which I would choose over the other. So I would have to have more expert advice. But we're talking about that period of time and that range of expenditures that is a minimum. Let me simply say to you now, from the conception of an idea to the production of a new weapon system, it now takes 15 years. I think we have to change that. I think we have to somehow eliminate this kind of a time lapse. Our systems are too ponderous, they're too inefficient, and we cannot maintain the pace that we have to maintain, in my judgment, when it takes that long to develop a weapon system.
Yes, through history, no country has been number one forever. What makes you feel that the United States should be number one forever?
Well, I don't know that we should forever. No country ever has forever. When you look back, each contributes something. You go back to the days of the Egyptians and their enormous contributions to the advancement of civilization. You look at the golden age of Greece. You look at the centuries of Roman rule, and incidentally, you find during the first and second centuries After Christ, when probably the Romans provided as good and as efficient, as fair a type of government that's ever existed on the face of the earth in all of history, according to many of the historians. But surely, perhaps if we can't be number one forever, and I doubt that we can, Solzhenitsyn says that Americans think that democracies can last. But democracies are islands in the rivers of history, in the river of history, in which the water is always rising. So I think it's perhaps a bit foolish to assume that we can last forever, but I'd like to last for half a century anyway. You know, why should we? Why should we? What better hope is there for freedom in the world? On whose shoulders does the hope of freedom rest? On ours. If we abandon the role of leadership in the world, who will pick up the escutcheon? Who will be the standard bearer of freedom in the world? No other country, no other combination of countries can today provide the leadership of the free world except the United States. And we can do it only so long as we maintain our economic viability and our military capability in order to provide the security shield for the free world. And if we renounce it, if we reject it, then surely we're going to see the dark ages again, because the Soviets are going to fill the vacuum. Believe me. No vacuum is going to exist for long among the nations of the world. They're all going to turn to the power. Today we balance the strength of the Soviet Union. If we fail to live up to that responsibility, the Soviets are going to move into the power vacuum, and they will unquestionably be the dominant power on earth, and they will attract as moths to a flame every other single nation into their sphere of influence and under their domination, including the United States. And I don't want to be oppressed. I want the United States to be free. I want to preserve this system. I want to preserve opportunity in the world. I want to expand the reach of freedom and the reach of individual opportunity. That's why we deserve to be a free nation.
It seems to me that you're blaming the people in this audience when I think it's the leadership.
Well, I said frankly that the political leadership, I didn't want to be accused of being two parties, which I inevitably would have been. But I said that the political leadership of this country have not shared with the American people the problems that exist or the solutions to those problems, that we've gone blithely along. I think the question really is whether or not a representative form of government such as we have has the mechanism to respond in a timely fashion simply because no politician ever wants to bring bad news, and they don't want to face up to anything that's not within the lifetime of their present term of office, which in the case of a member of the House is 2 years. And when you got a weapon system, it takes 15 years. This is why I've said we may be facing some fundamental changes in the form of government here. And this is why I propose two fundamental changes in forms of constitutional amendments. Elect a president for 1 6-year term. Elect a United States Senator for 1 8-year term where he never has to stand for re-election. Elect a congressman for 4 2-year terms. When they've served their 8 years, let them go there knowing that that's the limit that they'll serve. Let them go there knowing that they're going to have to come back and live among their peers and make a living under the laws they passed and the regulations they permitted. And then you'll have a different form of government.
Governor, it looks like we're going to have a race between Reagan and Carter this fall, unless something unlikely happens with John Anderson. And what I want to know is, I keep hoping it's something unlikely. What I want to know, what I want to know is, if Reagan is nominated, does the Republican Party face another 1964 Goldwater debacle?
Oh, I don't think so at all. Not at all. No, I think Governor Reagan clearly has a. Listen, I felt it. I know. He has a breadth and a depth of support that's unbelievable, and frankly, it crosses party lines. It's among Democrats, independents, and it's right where it should be. It's among small businessmen, it's among working people, it's among people you don't see or talk to, but it's there, believe me. And I think he's got a base on which the Republicans can build and win the election, very frankly.
Governor, I'd like to know how you feel about the national news media's coverage of your campaign and the other Republican presidential candidates' campaign, and about President Carter's balanced budgeting proposals.
You covered the waterfront. Well, let me, without being too specific, let me just simply say that unquestionably today the news media has the power to influence elections as they've never had before in the history of this country. No question about it. And at some point, it's going to have to be something that has to be taken into account. I strongly suspect that we're going to have regional primaries, or perhaps a national primary. We're going to have to shorten the term of these campaigns, and we're going to have to structure them in such a way that the polls, the predictions, and the news coverage each evening can't completely dictate who's going to be nominated in the not that they do it deliberately, but unquestionably they have the power now to influence elections far more than the American people do. Now, on the budget, you know, here again, he's read yesterday morning's Wall Street Journal if you have it. Go to the library here and get it, and read the lead editorial. What they said was that we normally are skeptical of politicians' proposals, and we were of this one, but we thought of this president's budget proposal, but we thought it would last for a while, but it didn't last but a day. We've now looked at it further and said if you take 1900 and 1981, he's not decreased the budget one single dime. It is precisely where it is today. He merely shifted between years, and he's not reduced the budget over a 2-year period by any amount. By any amount. It's a very startling analysis of the budget. And the truth of the matter is that it is primarily a rhetoric again, at which he's very good.
In light of the recent Soviet expansionism and their growing threat, besides just increasing our defense spending and increasing our military power, what kind of foreign policies do you think the president should be taking to stop them?
I think we have to adopt a whole new approach to foreign policy. I think we have to recognize that no one wants a nuclear war. No, we ought to do everything in our power to prevent it. We should recognize that economic affairs, economic pressures should play an increasingly important role, along with diplomacy, along with propaganda. And we're not prepared. We're not skilled in fighting that kind of a war. What we should be doing is shoring up the Western Hemisphere. We should be talking about a Western Hemisphere common market, and even going beyond that, we should be renewing our alliances with Canada, Mexico, Central America, and all of South America instead of insulting them. And the President, within the last 60 days, has said that he sees no threat to the Caribbean at all. And this is incredible to me. Incredible. They would make such a statement. We've already lost Nicaragua. We're going to lose El Salvador. As soon as it's gone, we're going to lose Honduras and Guatemala. Three prime ministers met, or the equivalent of them, in Grenada and Jamaica, and one other here just the other day, and 2 out of the 3 bitterly denounced the United States. The communists are forming a ring in the Leeward Islands and the Windward Islands in order to guard the entrance into the Gulf of Mexico, through which 70% of the oil passes. It goes into the United States, and we sit here blindly unaware, apparently, of what's happening to us. We should be bolstering our alliances in the Western Hemisphere. We should be talking about a Pacific Basin common market, including Canada, United States, Mexico, all of South America, New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, all the way up to Japan. We ought to be shoring up new alliances all over this world. We should recognize the volatility and the vulnerability of the Middle East. We should have had a military presence in the Middle East for the last 2 years. If we had, I dare say we wouldn't have had the capture of our embassy in Iran, and the Soviets might not have moved into Afghanistan if we'd had a military presence, and we should have known what was coming. In April of 1978, the Soviets installed their first puppet head of the Afghan government in Mohammad Taraki. We knew what was going to follow, and it did. It took 2 years, but there was no secret about it. And I said last October the 11th that that area was the most vulnerable, it is the most vital, and that we should have a strong military presence there. And it's deteriorating. And I said it was deteriorating. I said time is not on the side of peace in the Middle East, and we ought to do something now. Now the president moves. He's now called Prime Minister Begin and President Sadat over here because, again, he says it's not moving, it's deteriorating. And that's what I said October the 11th. And we should have moved then. That was 30 days before the capture of the embassy in Tehran. But nothing happened. And I simply say to you, in the meantime, what's happened? The reason the president's moving now is because the French and the Germans, and to a lesser extent the British, have said that they're going to call a European conference on the Middle East, and frankly, they're going to take the whole play away from us, and before this year's over, the United States and Israel are going to be completely isolated. That's what's going to happen to us. Just sure as the world, because we're not anticipatory in our actions, and we're not thoughtful enough in our analysis of what's happening around this world, and we don't move with clarity, and we don't move with certainty. Yes, sir.
The American people must take in consideration how this country first started, and I'm referring to the Indians. And yes, sir, we still have the insane mentality to say, in God we trust. The government has spent millions and billions of our tax-earned money for birds, in rebuilding other countries, and look at the unemployment rate in this country. How can this country be prosperous under these circumstances?
Well, I think we have tried to share the strength of the country with other countries around the world. We have spent billions of dollars in providing aid, relief to other less fortunate countries than we are. But we've also spent enormous sums here at home to improve the lot of everyone here at home. I should point out to you that HEW, through which most of, at least last year, HEW, through which most of our relief and help is funneled, has a budget of $200 billion, and that's the third largest budget in the world after the Soviet Union and after the United States. That budget is larger. The HEW's budget is larger than the total budget of Great Britain or France or Germany or Japan. So we've not completely neglected our own people. And you can't live in an isolated world, and I think we do owe our own people a very great deal. But we also have to share some of the strengths of this nation with less fortunate people around the world if we're going to indeed be the leader of the free world. Yes, sir.
In response to what the
I
young
think
lady...
we're going to have about one more.
Okay. In response to what the young lady said at the very beginning, I think the point you were looking for is a corporation. I believe you remember the Hershey Corporation, although I don't remember the country they did, but they, through their political or their influence, what they couldn't sell in America went to a third world country. Now, the respects from that is that, look at Iran. Iran was a third world country until the newfound oil, the newfound thing, and now look at what they have controlling us. And I think that is kind of what the idea she's talking about. That has nothing to do with what I want to ask you, but just in that.
We appreciate that clarification of her question.
Yeah, all right. As a former governor of Texas and an ex-presidential candidate, how are you going to address the issue of America going into a post-petroleum age? What economic repercussions and what kind of energy sources? How would you address that if you would have been president?
I would have addressed it as follows. I might add, as the National Science Foundation in the last month has said, we have to address it. I would mine more coal and burn more coal. I'd open up more public lands to explore for oil and gas, and I would expedite the building of the 92 nuclear power plants under design and construction in this country today. Nuclear power, oil and gas, and coal, the only hope we have for self-sufficiency in energy over the next quarter of a century. I would continue research in solar energy, geothermal, oil shales, wind, wave action, gas haul, and every other form. But I wouldn't deceive myself with believing, because those forms of energy today have no opposition, that they're going to solve our problem. They're not going to solve our problem for the remainder of this century. And if we want to become self-sufficient in energy, if we want to break the chains of bondage in which the OPEC countries hold us, we're going to have to rely on coal, nuclear power, oil and gas, and I'd be prepared to move on it tomorrow in the most expeditious way I could, and I think in 10 years, but less than 10 years, we could achieve almost total self-sufficiency in energy, and it'd be the greatest contribution we could make to ourselves and to the free world as well. Suppose we eliminated our demand for 8 million barrels of oil a day, and 8 million barrels of oil a day was dumped on the world market. What would happen to the price? The price would go down. And that would benefit every country in the world that today has to rely on imported fuel oil for their energy needs. That's what I'd do. Y'all have been wonderful to be here, and thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
This has been the 49th lecture in the Alf M. Landon Lecture Series, named in honor of former Kansas Governor Alf M. Landon. Today's speaker was former Texas Governor John Connally. Connally is also a former cabinet secretary. He was invited to participate in the series in June of 1979 before he began concentrating on campaigning for the Republican presidential nomination, from which he has since withdrawn. The next speaker in the Landon Lecture Series will be Hugh Sidey, the Washington contributing editor to Time magazine. That will be on March 27th at Kansas State University. This is the K-State Radio Network.